And do you remember stating that you can't understand why people think that Thug, I call him Jeffrey, had something to do with the killing of Nut, I call him Mr. Thomas? That doesn't make sense?
While you were there and you saw this going on and you saw him trying to get away from Rogers and shooting at Rogers, you hear him shout out anything like, "Hey, this is for YSL"?
No.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because he didn't do that, did he?
And we are back, Go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Today we're bringing you a quick video. It's not a sit back and relax. It's a hunker down and just watch. It's only 20 minutes, y'all, so I'm sure you can get through the whole thing. The first part of the video, you're going to see Brian Steele elicit testimony from DA Sprinkle, yes, of the Fulton County District Attorney's Office, where he admitted he did not believe that Thug had anything to do with the Donovan Thomas situation, y'all. It's just wild. I can't believe more people aren't talking about this. And then the second clip is a little bit more lighthearted, where we're going to see Attorney Adams go in on another witness. These witnesses are getting on the stand and they're just saying anything. At least that's the way that Adams is treating this testimony. It's lighthearted. So just, sit back, watch the whole thing. You're going to see kind of a back and forth with him, with Adams and Hilton. But I think Adams gets the best of this back and forth. Y'all, go ahead and hit the like again. Don't forget to comment and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into it.
You were asked by the Honorable Mr. Body a couple of questions about listening to or being present at, actually, interviews of Mr. Zachary, also known as Little D.
That's correct.
All right. And there's two Little Ds. Earlier I was saying Mr. Garlington, he's also Little D. Fair to say?
That's correct.
All right. I'm now talking about Mr. Zachary.
Yes.
Also known as another Little D. All right. You were present at the April 13, 2017 recorded interview with Mr. Zachary. Fair to say?
Yes, I was there.
And you were there with other law enforcement, including Detective Thorpe, Detective Dennis, Detective Gaither. I believe if I'm leaving someone out, I'm not trying to.
Yes, that's correct.
You were not present for the August 5, 2015 interview with Mr. Zachary, but you've referenced it today with Mr. Body and you've reviewed that. Fair to say?
That's right.
That's also audio video. Fair?
That's correct.
In the August 5th, 2015 interview that you recorded, that you reviewed, that was recorded that you reviewed, did Mr. Zachary make it clear that Mr. Williams did not know about the killing of Donovan Thomas till afterwards?
From what I remember, yes, he did talk. Yes, the short answer to your question is yes.
In the April 13, 2017 interview with Mr. Zachary, did he say something similar?
I don't recall how much detail we went into him on that, but yes, from what I remember, he said the same thing. He had no point implicated Mr. Williams.
I'm going to ask you the same exact question, the same dates. We'll take them one at a time if it's okay with you. Start with the August 5, 2015 recording that you reviewed first. The tour bus shooting of a gentleman, phenomenal artist, Dwayne Carter, also known as Lil Wayne. You know who I'm talking about?
I do.
All right, that's April 26, 2015 date, that shooting of the tour bus?
April April 2015. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is it fair to say that Mr. Zachary, at the August 5th, 2015 interview, you were not present for it, but you reviewed, said that Mr. Williams had no involvement in that whatsoever, and Lil Wayne, Jeffrey Williams, idolizes Lil Wayne?
I don't remember, since I wasn't working on that case, but so I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember him mentioning it, and he did not mention that Mr. Williams was involved.
Same question for you, August or April 13, 2017. If it came up, tell the ladies and gentlemen, jury, if Mr. Zachary again stated Mr. Williams was not involved in the shooting bus of that tour bus.
That I don't recall it coming up during that interview.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you remember Mr. Zachary stating that Mr. Copeland was responsible for shooting TIG. Do you know what TIG Studios is? You know what I'm talking about?
Metropolitan Parkway?
Yeah, 675? Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you remember Mr. Zachary explaining that Mr. Copeland fired bullets into that establishment?
Objection, Your Honor. That's not.
Okay, I need you to speak up a little bit.
Objection, facts, no evidence.
It's in the recording that was played for the jury, that was reviewed by Mr. Sprinkle, and Mr. Abadi asked Mr. Sprinkle about that same interview.
It's not my recollection of how.
Sustained.
Do you recall Mr. Zachary stating that Mr. Copeland and Tay, do you know who Tay is? Tay, T-A-Y? I'm spelling T-A-Y.
Which Tay?
Threat.
No, I don't recall this.
You don't remember?
I do not remember this.
Do you remember Mr. Zachary stating that Mr. Copeland and another person were responsible for shooting Rich Homie Kwan's father at the barbershop? Different barbershop, not the January 10, 2015.
No, I don't remember that.
Okay. All right, let's talk about all the work that you talked about here and your studies, and I'm not mentioning everything, but your interviews, reviewing interviews, cell phone plotting, videos, all your work, okay? Mm-hmm. Then, in some point, do you remember the date in 2018 you interviewed Mr. Kelvin Treadwell, O.G. Bentley? Do you remember that?
Which day was this again?
2018.
Oh, right. Yes, I do remember that. Yes. That was another matter, but yeah, I do remember it.
And do you remember stating that you can't understand why people think that Thug, I call him Jeffrey, had something to do with the killing of Nut, I call him Mr. Thomas? That doesn't make sense? That's the thing that always confused me about this case, because all these rumors started immediately that Young Thug had something to do with it. But yeah, then Young Thug put a picture of him on Instagram, Mr. Thomas. So I'm looking at these people saying, oh, you and Little Woody had something to do with it. The more investigated the case, the more I've investigated the case, I just don't. Near as I could tell, Young Thug and Birdman were friends with Mr. Thomas or Nut, so I don't know why people say that he was involved.
Well, I recorded the interview, so I'm assuming that's a verbatim quote. I don't have everything I said during that interview memorized, but I'm assuming that, like I said, since you're reading from a transcript, that, yeah, I said that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello.
It's Sergeant Johnson, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. My name is Keith Adams. I've got just a couple questions for you because you were there that day, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your observations from that day. Okay.
Okay.
Now, and if I'm going to recount some of your testimony and make sure I got this correct. So I hear that you've been with APD. I think you said 17 years, right?
Yes.
You were a gang investigator at some point. True.
Yes.
You were with the FBI at some point.
Yes.
You were detailed to the ATF, if I heard you correctly.
Yes.
All right. You were familiar, at least on February the 7th of 2022, you're familiar with this guy named Christian Eppinger.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you received notification or a call about the fact that APD officers were looking for Mr. Eppinger, you decided to go and assist. Officer asked for help.
Yes.
Okay. And what you knew when you were going down there to assist was that there was a warrant out for the arrest of this guy, Mr. Eppinger, right?
Yes.
Now, although you'd been in the gang unit, it wasn't what you knew about him being wanted was that he was wanted for an armed robbery that he was alleged to have committed. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. So that is the offense that you were aware that you were going down there to assist in apprehending him for.
Yes.
Okay. And I heard you testify that you got down to the Chevron down at 221 Cleveland, and that is where you first saw Mr. Eppinger.
Yes.
He was by himself.
No, there's a a group of probably 8 to 10 people at that gas station.
He was standing in front of the store.
Yes.
Okay. And at some point he walked away from the store and you saw that.
Yes.
Okay. And he walked away by himself, correct?
Yes.
And I presume you saw the video, or if you didn't see the video, you mentioned seeing him interact, is your word, with someone at the gate going into the complex, true?
Yes.
All right. And I think I saw this correctly, and maybe your memory is better than mine, but it was pretty empty out there that day on the streets.
In the apartment complex?
In the apartment
Yes.
complex, right.
Yes.
And in fact, the last video that we saw, the only one that you were shown, where we're looking down that driveway, we see your vehicle, and we see the interaction at the far end. You don't see anyone else out there in the complex, do you?
No.
Okay. And so, in fact, when you see him, Eppinger, interact with this guy at the front gate, he walks off, and you're still watching him after that. Is that right?
Yes.
Other officers were called in, and they were coming in to effect the arrest for this robbery that he was charged with, right?
Yes.
Okay. They weren't coming to arrest him for any sort of, well, strike that. Let me ask you a tighter question. When you pulled in behind Officer Rogers.
Yes.
And so you had a good view of everything that was going on.
Yes.
And it is fair and accurate to say that Officer Rogers got out of his car and tried to apprehend Mr. Eppinger.
Yes.
Mr. Eppinger resisted.
Yes.
Right? Mr. Eppinger seemed like he didn't want to, he certainly wasn't getting down on the ground. Correct. He was by himself, though, at that time.
Correct.
Right? There wasn't anyone around him.
No.
There wasn't anyone who seemed to be advising him to do anything. Right? There wasn't anyone who was helping him with anything that he himself, by himself, was doing on that day, at that moment.
Correct.
Okay. And so when you saw him fire and shoot at Officer Rogers, who was just doing his job, Mr. Eppinger appeared to be doing that all by himself on his own. True?
Yes. Christian Eppinger fired the gun by himself.
And then Christian Eppinger, you got out and you engaged because you see this guy who is obviously committing a crime, firing on one of your officers, and you intended to make sure he was no longer a threat. He wouldn't hurt your officer anymore. He wouldn't hurt you. He needed to be taken into custody, right?
Correct.
And he fired back at you.
Correct.
And then he ran off. In the video, he runs around a corner from where you are. Is that accurate?
Yes.
There doesn't appear to be anyone who's helping him or soliciting him or aiding him to get away. He's doing all this all by himself.
At the time, I didn't know.
Okay. Well, there wasn't anyone else around, right?
Oh, no.
Okay. Naturally, you stayed and you assisted and rendered aid to Officer Rogers, correct?
Yes.
And other officers came in and ultimately ended up effecting the arrest and arresting Mr. Eppinger.
Yes.
Okay. Sergeant, that's all I have. Thank you.
Sergeant Johnson, I believe you said that the warrants were for armed robbery.
Yes.
At the time, did you have any knowledge about anyone else involved in the armed robbery for which Mr. Eppinger's arrest warrants
Overruled.
were issued?
I remember he had a co-defendant in that case. I don't remember his name off the top of my head.
And was that individual also associated with YSL?
Yes.
Does the name Durante Beebe?
Section.
Sustained.
On cross-examination, you were asked whether or not did you see anyone advising Mr. Eppinger about this shooting? Do you remember being asked that question?
Yes.
Or did anyone else aid him or abet him? Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
As a gang unit investigator, have you had training as a gang investigator?
Yes.
And you said you were in the unit for 10 years?
Yes.
As a investigator within the gang unit, did you find that sometimes...
I'm going to object to the question. He's not being qualified, and there will be no foundation for him to answer the question.
It's also calls for speculation and an opinion on the intent of others.
And leading.
I don't know what the question's going to be. I mean, it may be that it sustained to leading, but the rest of them,
As a member,
yeah,
and
rephrase your question and let me consider it.
as an investigator in the gang unit, have there been other cases of gang members shooting at or in the direction of law?
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Did you know of Durante Beebe?
Yes.
And do you know Durante Beebe through your work in the gang?
Objection as to relevance, Your Honor.
You're right, I can approach. Do you know Durante Beebe?
Yes.
Or do you know of a Durante Beebe?
Yes.
And is that through your work in the gang unit?
Yes.
And is he associated with any gang?
Yes.
What gang is that?
YSL.
And let me ask you, based on your training and your 10 years with the gang unit, what are some of the ways that gang members increase status within their gang?
Object again, he has not been qualified, and he's not qualified to answer this question.
Sustained.
How many years of training have you had as a member of the gang unit?
Throughout my time in the gang unit, we trained almost weekly. We have weekly meetings, intel meetings, information meetings. We have formal training. I've probably amassed 100 hours or so of formal gang training.
Okay. And did you also get on the job training just being?
Objection to the leading question.
I'm going to allow that.
Did you also receive on the job training just based on your work within the gang unit?
Yes.
And based on some of your training, did you learn how gang members will try to increase their status within the gang?
Yes.
And what are some of those ways that gang members?
I'm going to object again. Calls for expert testimony. He's not been qualified. We've not been given notice of any such. And so I would object to him being allowed to answer any of these questions.
Based on his knowledge, training, and experience.
Overruled.
What are some of the ways that gang members increase their status within a gang?
Typically through violence and getting money through illicit means.
And when you say through violence, is shooting an act of violence?
Yes.
And specifically shooting at a cop, is that an act of violence?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any recross?
Sergeant Johnson, are you suggesting by your testimony just now that Christian Eppinger, when he was about to be arrested by this officer, that he shot Officer Rogers to increase his status in the gang and to get money for the gang? Is that your testimony?
No.
Okay.
It's not either or it's not both. It could be either or. In this situation, I would say the violence isn't increasing your status in the gang.
Or it could be just someone who was trying to get away from the police, right?
Yeah, could be.
And in fact, you're not in, I mean, I don't know Christian Eppinger. You don't know him either. You're not in his mind, are you?
No, I'm not in his mind.
Right. What you do know is that you see him in this parking lot. He's by himself, right?
When he leaves the group of 8 to 10 people at 221 Cleveland.
Yeah, I'm not asking you about 221 Cleveland. I just asked you about the apartment complex. He's by himself, right?
Objection, asked and answered, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You were asked about somebody named Durante Beebe.
Yes.
The picture that you were shown, the video, where was Durante Beebe in that video?
In the surveillance video, he wasn't in it.
He wasn't there, right?
No.
Okay. And so when you see Mr. Eppinger and he shoots, he runs by himself, right?
Yes.
Okay. You hear him? Did you listen to the any of the videos, the body cameras, the dash cam, any of that?
No, I haven't had any audio.
Okay. While you were there and you saw this going on, and you saw him trying to get away from Rogers and shooting at Rogers, you hear him shout out anything like, "Hey, this is for YSL"?
No.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because he didn't do that, did he?
Well, it's ridiculous. I don't think anybody would shoot a cop and then say, this is for YSL. That's not how this works.
Right, right. And what is also ridiculous is you trying to determine that he was doing something that day to increase his status or to get money, right?
I'm not
Objection,
trying.
argumentative.
Sustained.
Bottom line is, your involvement here is you go to assist an arrest, and Officer Rogers tries to arrest him, and this guy shoots Officer Rogers, right?
Yes.
That's all.
All right.